Welcome to Black Power Stories, where every story reminds us that true justice always finds its way. If you believe everyone deserves dignity, fairness, and respect, you're in the right place. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. The moment he raised his voice, everything on that quiet Texas road changed forever. The afternoon sun hung low over a suburban highway just outside Houston, casting long shadows across the asphalt as vehicles slowed to a crawl behind flashing patrol lights. Officer Daniel Whitmore stepped out of his cruiser with sharp, deliberate movements, his hand resting near his belt as his eyes locked onto the stopped vehicle ahead. Inside sat Colonel Ava Richardson, though no one on that road would have guessed her rank, only seeing a calm woman in a dark jacket with both hands visible on the steering wheel. License and registration. Now, Whitmore said, his tone clipped, already assuming control of the moment. Ava complied without hesitation, her voice steady as she responded. "You'll find everything is up to date, officer." But something about her composure unsettled him, the way she didn't rush, didn't plead, didn't react the way he expected. Behind him, Officer Ryan Collins stood near the cruiser, watching quietly as traffic piled up and bystanders began to notice, some pulling out their phones. The air felt heavier now, not because of anything spoken, but because of everything assumed. Whitmore circled the vehicle once, his gaze narrowing as he studied her through the window, his voice rising slightly. "Step out of the car." Ava paused for a fraction of a second, then opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, standing straight despite the tension tightening around the scene. The wind moved gently across the highway, carrying the distant hum of engines and the uneasy silence of waiting strangers. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly. That question seemed to irritate him more than any resistance would have. Whitmore gestured sharply, ordering her to place her hands where he could see them at all times. Ava complied again, her movements controlled, measured, almost unnervingly calm. Minutes stretched as more officers arrived, the situation escalating not through action but through perception, each assumption feeding the next. Collins shifted uncomfortably, noticing something in Ava's posture that didn't match the situation unfolding, but Whitmore pressed forward, convinced he had already read the story correctly. "People like you always think rules don't apply," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough to be heard. Ava's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened slightly, as if registering the weight of the statement rather than the words themselves. Then, in a sudden shift of movement and misinterpretation, Whitmore reacted to what he believed was a threat, drawing his weapon as voices around the scene rose in confusion. "Stop!" someone shouted from the roadside. But the moment had already fractured beyond repair. A single shot echoed across the highway, freezing everything in place. Ava stumbled backward and fell onto the pavement as gasps erupted from witnesses and radios crackled urgently. Collins froze, staring in disbelief, while Whitmore remained motionless for a brief second, as if trying to reconcile what had just happened with what he thought he saw. The entire scene dissolved into chaos, sirens intensifying in the distance, people shouting, phones recording every second. And beneath it all, unnoticed by most, a small insignia on Ava's identification card slipped partially into view near her hand, glinting faintly under the fading sunlight, waiting for someone to finally see what had been there all along. The world seemed to hold its breath in the seconds after everything stopped moving, as if the entire stretch of highway had been suspended in disbelief. Vehicles remained frozen in place, drivers staring through windshields that suddenly felt too thin to separate them from what they had just witnessed. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood near the roadside with rigid posture, his breathing uneven, eyes fixed on the scene as if waiting for reality to correct itself. Officer Ryan Collins took a hesitant step forward, then stopped again, torn between procedure and shock. No one spoke with certainty, only fragmented voices over radios calling for immediate response, coordinates, and backup units. On the pavement, Colonel Ava Richardson remained conscious, her movements limited but deliberate, one hand slowly shifting toward her jacket as if guided more by instinct than urgency. That was when Collins noticed it first, a small metallic edge partially visible beneath the fabric near her identification holder. He crouched slightly, squinting as recognition began to form in hesitation rather than clarity. Whitmore noticed his reaction and followed his gaze, his expression tightening as he demanded confirmation, but Collins did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached carefully and lifted the identification just enough for the emblem to catch the light, revealing markings that did not belong to any civilian database or local authority. A quiet shift passed through his posture, subtle but undeniable, as if the ground beneath his certainty had changed texture. "That is military," Collins finally said, his voice lower than before, almost unwilling to commit to the words. Whitmore did not respond at first, only staring as distant sirens grew louder, converging on the scene from multiple directions. The traffic behind them had come to a complete standstill now. Passengers stepping out of vehicles despite instructions, phones raised, capturing every second. Within minutes, additional patrol units arrived, followed closely by an unmarked vehicle that did not announce itself but carried a different weight in its presence. The door opened slowly and a man stepped out, his posture calm, controlled, and immediately observant. This was Captain Marcus Hale, and his eyes scanned the scene with precision before landing on the identification still partially visible in Collins's hand. The atmosphere changed again, not through noise, but through recognition. Hale moved closer, took the identification fully, and studied it in silence long enough for the tension to deepen further. Then his expression shifted, not dramatically, but with the unmistakable weight of understanding something far larger than the moment itself. He looked up toward Whitmore, then toward Collins, then finally toward the woman on the ground, and his voice when it came was steady but firm. "Do you understand what you are looking at?" he said, not as a question, but as a warning wrapped in disbelief. Whitmore opened his mouth, but no words came immediately, only fragments of justification that now sounded uncertain even to him. Behind them, radio channels became more urgent, referencing rank verification, chain of command alerts, and restricted personnel identification protocols. The highway, once ordinary and routine, now felt like the center of something far beyond its borders. And in the middle of it all, the truth that had been hidden in plain sight began to surface slowly, as if waiting for the right person to finally give it a name. The highway had transformed into a controlled silence, where every movement felt measured and every sound carried unnecessary weight. Emergency units had established a perimeter around the area, guiding vehicles away while maintaining distance from the growing center of attention. Captain Marcus Hale stood slightly apart from the rest, holding the identification card with steady hands, his eyes scanning every detail with a focus that suggested he understood the implications far beyond what was visible. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained rigid near his cruiser, his earlier confidence replaced by an uncertainty that he could not fully conceal, while Officer Ryan Collins continued to observe the identification with a growing sense of realization that made the air feel increasingly heavy. Ava Richardson was now seated with support from paramedics, her posture still composed despite the circumstances, her attention shifting between the people around her and the distant sound of additional vehicles approaching the scene. Hale finally broke the silence, speaking in a calm but authoritative tone as he confirmed details through his secure communication device, each word adding structure to what was quickly becoming a situation of national significance. Within moments, his confirmation was acknowledged on the other end of the line, and the reaction was immediate, shifting the atmosphere once again without any physical change in the environment. Additional unmarked vehicles arrived, followed by personnel who moved with a level of discipline that distinguished them from standard law enforcement response. The recognition among those present was subtle at first, then increasingly clear as one of the arriving officials stepped forward and addressed Hale directly, confirming the identity associated with the credentials that had been recovered. At that moment, the weight of understanding settled across the scene like a silent wave. Ava Richardson was not simply a military officer. She held a position of command within the United States Army that carried authority far beyond what anyone at the traffic stop had initially perceived. The realization caused a visible shift in behavior among the responding personnel, as procedures were immediately adjusted and communication channels elevated to higher command levels. Hale turned slightly toward Whitmore, his expression no longer uncertain but controlled and firm, as he instructed him to remain in place and await further direction from internal affairs and military coordination units. Whitmore attempted to respond, but his words faltered, replaced by silence as the situation around him no longer aligned with his expectations or authority. Collins stood quietly, his earlier suspicion now confirmed in a way that left him visibly unsettled as he processed the sequence of events that had led to this moment. Ava remained composed, her focus steady, her presence now acknowledged in a completely different context than before. Within minutes, a senior military representative arrived, stepping into the control perimeter with immediate recognition of the situation. His attention went directly to Ava, confirming her status through a brief but precise exchange that required no further explanation. The atmosphere shifted once more as he issued clear instructions that placed the entire incident under joint review between military oversight and federal authorities. Whitmore, now fully aware of the implications, stood in silence as the reality of the situation settled in without the need for further confrontation. The highway, once defined by routine movement and ordinary decisions, had become the center of a chain of authority that extended far beyond its original scope, and every person present understood that what had unfolded there would not remain confined to that single moment in time. The presence of senior military authority changed the rhythm of the entire scene, as if an invisible boundary had been drawn around the highway, and everyone now understood they were standing inside something far larger than a local incident. Vehicles remained halted at a controlled distance while official units continued to coordinate across multiple communication channels, each update reinforcing the seriousness of the situation. Captain Marcus Hale maintained his position near the center of operations, listening carefully as additional confirmation reports arrived through encrypted military channels, his expression steady but increasingly focused. Colonel Ava Richardson was now under formal protection protocol, her condition being assessed with professional precision while maintaining her privacy and command respect. The earlier confusion that had defined the moment was gradually replaced by structured procedure as federal and military oversight converged into a unified response. Officer Ryan Collins stood slightly apart, his attention shifting between Ava and the unfolding coordination, recognizing that every assumption made earlier had been overturned by verified authority. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained silent, his posture rigid but visibly unsettled, as internal affairs representatives began to arrive and quietly integrate themselves into the scene without drawing unnecessary attention. The atmosphere was no longer defined by urgency alone, but by accountability, as every action taken prior to this point was now being documented and reviewed in real time. A senior military legal officer arrived shortly after, exchanging brief confirmation with Captain Hale before proceeding to verify Colonel Richardson's status through secure identification protocols. Once confirmed, a clear directive was issued that transferred full jurisdictional oversight of the incident to a joint investigative task force involving both military command and federal law enforcement authorities. This shift immediately altered the structure of authority on site, requiring all personnel involved in the initial traffic stop to remain in designated holding positions pending formal review. Whitmore was informed of this decision in a calm but unmistakably final tone, leaving no room for interpretation or resistance. His earlier confidence had fully dissolved into silence, replaced by the realization that the situation had moved beyond anything he had anticipated. Collins, observing the transition, maintained a professional stance, though the tension in his expression reflected the weight of what he had witnessed from the beginning. Ava Richardson remained composed throughout the transition, her focus steady as she engaged briefly with the military officer now assigned to her case, confirming her operational status and the importance of maintaining confidentiality regarding ongoing assignments. The surrounding perimeter expanded slightly as additional security measures were implemented, ensuring that all communication, documentation, and witness coordination adhered to federal and military standards. The highway itself, once a routine stretch of controlled traffic, now functioned as an active command environment, with every movement carefully coordinated and every decision recorded for formal review. As the final layer of command structure settled into place, it became clear to everyone present that the events of the day were no longer an isolated traffic encounter, but part of a larger chain of responsibility that would be examined at the highest levels of authority. Under the expanded command structure, the entire highway corridor had shifted from an active roadside incident into a fully documented federal and military review zone, where every statement, timestamp, and decision was being recorded for formal evaluation. Portable command stations were established along the perimeter, allowing coordinated communication between military oversight, federal investigators, and local authorities who had been reassigned to support roles under direct supervision. Captain Marcus Hale remained central to the coordination effort. His focus divided between procedural requirements and the verification updates arriving from secure command channels confirming Colonel Ava Richardson's operational status and current assignment sensitivity. Colonel Richardson herself remained calm and composed within the protected area, her demeanor unchanged despite the scale of attention now surrounding her presence, speaking only when necessary and providing clear, structured responses to verify her identity and mission parameters. Officer Ryan Collins stood nearby under instruction to provide a complete and detailed account of the sequence of events as he observed them, his statements being recorded in real time by federal investigators who maintained a neutral and methodical approach throughout the process. Officer Daniel Whitmore was separated from the main coordination area and placed under administrative supervision, where he was required to remain available for questioning by internal affairs and military liaison officers. His earlier assumptions and interpretations of the situation were now being reviewed against verified identification data and procedural protocol, creating a clear contrast between perception and established fact. The atmosphere across the highway had shifted from confusion to structured accountability, with every individual present now aware that the outcome of the incident would extend far beyond the immediate location. Additional senior personnel arrived during this phase, including representatives from federal oversight divisions tasked with evaluating interagency conduct and ensuring compliance with national operational standards. Their arrival reinforced the seriousness of the situation, as they immediately began reviewing communication logs, radio transmissions, and on-site decisions made during the initial traffic stop. Colonel Richardson's status as a United States Army colonel placed the entire incident under heightened review, requiring coordination between multiple branches of authority to ensure full transparency and procedural accuracy. Throughout this process, there was a consistent emphasis on clarity, documentation, and adherence to protocol, replacing the earlier uncertainty with structured analysis. Collins continued his account with careful precision, acknowledging moments where misinterpretation may have influenced perception, while maintaining factual consistency in his statements. Whitmore remained under observation as procedural review expanded to include body camera footage, dispatch recordings, and witness statements from civilians present at the scene. The integration of all these elements formed a comprehensive reconstruction of events intended for formal evaluation by oversight committees. As time progressed, it became increasingly clear that the situation would serve as a reference case for interagency protocol training and accountability standards moving forward. The highway, once a simple transit route, had become a controlled environment of federal significance, where every action was subject to review and every assumption was being measured against verified authority, leaving no aspect of the incident outside the scope of formal investigation. As the formal investigation progressed under unified federal and military oversight, the environment surrounding the highway transitioned into a fully stabilized operational command scene, where all activity was now strictly regulated and continuously documented. The earlier urgency had evolved into procedural discipline, with each agency maintaining defined roles to ensure that every detail of the incident was preserved accurately for official review. Colonel Ava Richardson remained within a secure protective zone, her presence now acknowledged at the highest levels of coordination, while still maintaining a composed and controlled demeanor as additional verification checks confirmed her operational status and mission clearance. Captain Marcus Hale continued to oversee interagency communication flow, ensuring that all incoming reports from federal analysts, military command, and local enforcement units were synchronized into a single, verified timeline of events. Officer Ryan Collins was still providing structured testimony, his account now cross-referenced with multiple sources including audio logs, visual recordings, and automated dispatch records, all of which contributed to a comprehensive reconstruction of the incident sequence. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained under formal administrative restriction, with internal affairs and federal oversight officers conducting a detailed review of his actions, communication decisions, and procedural interpretations during the initial traffic stop. As the review deepened, discrepancies between perception and verified protocol became increasingly apparent, prompting additional layers of inquiry from supervisory authorities. Senior federal investigators arrived with expanded authority to assess compliance with interagency engagement standards, focusing specifically on decision-making processes under high-stress field conditions. Their presence reinforced the structured nature of the investigation, as all personnel were reminded that the evaluation would be based strictly on documented evidence and established operational guidelines. Colonel Richardson's identity as a United States Army colonel continued to serve as the central point of jurisdictional coordination, requiring ongoing communication between military command structures and federal oversight divisions. Throughout this process, the emphasis remained on accuracy, accountability, and procedural transparency, with no deviation allowed from formal investigative standards. The highway perimeter, once defined by confusion and rapid escalation, now functioned as a controlled analytical environment where every recorded detail contributed to a broader understanding of interagency response effectiveness. As additional data was compiled, including communication transcripts and body camera footage analysis, the investigative framework began to establish a clear and uninterrupted timeline of events leading up to and following the critical turning point of the encounter. All involved agencies operated under strict directive to maintain neutrality and precision, ensuring that conclusions would be drawn solely from verified evidence. By this stage, it was evident that the incident would be subject to extended review at multiple levels of command, with potential implications for future training protocols and operational standards across all participating agencies. As the formal investigation progressed under unified federal and military oversight, the environment surrounding the highway transitioned into a fully stabilized operational command scene, where all activity was now strictly regulated and continuously documented. The earlier urgency had evolved into procedural discipline, with each agency maintaining defined roles to ensure that every detail of the incident was preserved accurately for official review. Colonel Ava Richardson remained within a secure protective zone, her presence now acknowledged at the highest levels of coordination, while still maintaining a composed and controlled demeanor as additional verification checks confirmed her operational status and mission clearance. Captain Marcus Hale continued to oversee interagency communication flow, ensuring that all incoming reports from federal analysts, military command, and local enforcement units were synchronized into a single, verified timeline of events. Officer Ryan Collins was still providing structured testimony, his account now cross-referenced with multiple sources including audio logs, visual recordings, and automated dispatch records, all of which contributed to a comprehensive reconstruction of the incident sequence. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained under formal administrative restriction, with internal affairs and federal oversight officers conducting a detailed review of his actions, communication decisions, and procedural interpretations during the initial traffic stop. As the review deepened, discrepancies between perception and verified protocol became increasingly apparent, prompting additional layers of inquiry from supervisory authorities. Senior federal investigators arrived with expanded authority to assess compliance with interagency engagement standards, focusing specifically on decision-making processes under high-stress field conditions. Their presence reinforced the structured nature of the investigation, as all personnel were reminded that the evaluation would be based strictly on documented evidence and established operational guidelines. Colonel Richardson's identity as a United States Army colonel continued to serve as the central point of jurisdictional coordination, requiring ongoing communication between military command structures and federal oversight divisions. Throughout this process, the emphasis remained on accuracy, accountability, and procedural transparency, with no deviation allowed from formal investigative standards. The highway perimeter, once defined by confusion and rapid escalation, now functioned as a controlled analytical environment where every recorded detail contributed to a broader understanding of interagency response effectiveness. As additional data was compiled, including communication transcripts and body camera footage analysis, the investigative framework began to establish a clear and uninterrupted timeline of events leading up to and following the critical turning point of the encounter. All involved agencies operated under strict directive to maintain neutrality and precision, ensuring that conclusions would be drawn solely from verified evidence. By this stage, it was evident that the incident would be subject to extended review at multiple levels of command, with potential implications for future training protocols and operational standards across all participating agencies. The final phase of the operation unfolded under a level of control and scrutiny that had transformed the entire highway corridor into a fully secured federal oversight environment, where every action, statement, and recorded detail was being continuously analyzed by multiple branches of authority. The earlier tension had fully transitioned into structured resolution procedures, with communication channels now operating in synchronized alignment between military command, federal investigators, and internal oversight divisions. Colonel Ava Richardson remained at the center of protected coordination, her presence now formally acknowledged across all participating agencies, with her status confirmed through repeated verification cycles that reinforced her authority and operational clearance. Captain Marcus Hale continued to manage interagency communication flow, ensuring that every update from command centers and field units was accurately documented and integrated into the master incident timeline without deviation or omission. Officer Ryan Collins remained in structured review testimony, his account now fully cross-referenced with digital records, audio transmissions, and synchronized video capture from multiple sources positioned along the highway corridor. His statements were treated as part of a broader factual reconstruction process designed to ensure precision and consistency across all documented perspectives. Officer Daniel Whitmore was still under formal administrative restriction, with his actions during the initial engagement now subject to comprehensive evaluation by federal oversight and internal affairs coordination teams. The review process had expanded to include psychological assessment of decision-making under pressure, procedural adherence analysis, and communication interpretation accuracy during the critical escalation window. Senior federal oversight officials maintained a continuous presence on site, reviewing compiled evidence streams in real time and adjusting investigative parameters as additional data became available. Colonel Richardson's verified status continued to serve as the central reference point for jurisdictional authority, ensuring that all procedural decisions remained aligned with military protocol and federal coordination standards. The environment surrounding the highway remained fully secured, with controlled access zones preventing unauthorized entry while allowing uninterrupted investigative activity across all designated sectors. As the structured analysis progressed, the complete sequence of events was reconstructed with increasing clarity, revealing a precise chronological framework supported by verified communication logs and synchronized visual documentation. Every detail was processed through formal channels to ensure that final determinations would be based solely on validated evidence rather than assumption or interpretation. The situation, once defined by uncertainty and rapid escalation, had now evolved into a controlled institutional review process of significant importance, with implications extending beyond the immediate incident into broader operational standards and interagency response protocols across multiple levels of authority. As the formal review process continued under unified federal and military oversight, the entire highway corridor had fully transitioned into a controlled analytical environment where every piece of information was being verified against synchronized command records. The earlier uncertainty that once defined the scene had now been replaced by structured procedural clarity, with each agency operating under strict coordination protocols designed to ensure full transparency and accountability. Colonel Ava Richardson remained securely positioned within protected command oversight, her identity and authority now fully confirmed and documented across all participating systems, reinforcing her role as the central jurisdictional reference for the entire investigation. Captain Marcus Hale maintained operational coordination across multiple communication channels, ensuring that all incoming data streams from federal analysts, military command centers, and local enforcement units were accurately aligned within the master timeline of events. Officer Ryan Collins continued to provide detailed testimony under formal recording conditions, his statements now integrated into a comprehensive evidence framework that included synchronized visual footage, radio communication logs, and digital dispatch records. His account was being carefully analyzed alongside all other data sources to ensure consistency and factual accuracy across the entire investigative reconstruction. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained under strict administrative review, with his actions, decisions, and communication patterns during the initial engagement being evaluated through multiple layers of procedural analysis conducted by federal oversight and internal affairs specialists. Senior investigators continued to refine the reconstructed timeline, identifying key decision points and communication exchanges that contributed to the escalation and subsequent resolution of the incident. Throughout this process, all personnel were reminded that the evaluation was strictly evidence-based, requiring full adherence to established federal and military review standards without deviation or interpretation beyond documented fact. Additional oversight officials from national command structures arrived to observe the ongoing proceedings, further reinforcing the significance of the case within interagency operational history. Their presence ensured that all findings would be subject to higher-level validation before any final determinations were issued. Colonel Richardson's verified status remained the anchor point for jurisdictional alignment, ensuring that all procedural decisions were correctly attributed within the unified command framework. As the investigation progressed, the complete sequence of events became increasingly defined through layered verification, confirming each stage of the incident from initial contact through final containment and resolution. The structured review process eliminated ambiguity and replaced it with a precise operational narrative supported by verified data points and authenticated communication records. By this stage, the incident had fully transitioned from a field event into a formal case study under national review, with implications for future interagency training, protocol refinement, and operational coordination standards across all participating authorities. As the investigation reached its final stage under unified federal and military oversight, the entire operational environment on the highway had fully stabilized into a closed analytical system where all evidence streams were being consolidated into a single verified case structure. The structured review process had moved beyond active reconstruction and into formal validation, where every recorded action, communication, and decision point was being confirmed against synchronized command archives. Colonel Ava Richardson remained at the center of jurisdictional authority recognition, her status fully validated across all military and federal databases, ensuring complete alignment between field identification and command verification systems. Captain Marcus Hale continued to oversee the final integration of interagency documentation, ensuring that the compiled evidence record reflected a precise and uninterrupted timeline of events from initial contact through resolution. Officer Ryan Collins had completed his structured testimony, which now formed part of the official investigative record, cross-referenced with digital communication logs, environmental recordings, and multi-angle visual documentation captured during the incident. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained under formal administrative review, with his conduct, communication decisions, and procedural interpretations now fully cataloged for final assessment by federal oversight authorities and internal affairs command units. Senior investigators had completed the primary phase of evidence consolidation, confirming consistency across all verified data sources and eliminating discrepancies through cross-validation protocols. Additional oversight representatives from national command structures were present during the final review confirmation stage, ensuring that all procedural outcomes met the highest standards of interagency accountability and operational integrity. The environment surrounding the highway remained fully secured and controlled, with all civilian access restricted and all operational zones maintained under strict federal supervision. As final confirmations were processed, the comprehensive reconstruction of events was formally validated, establishing a definitive record of the incident that would serve as a reference framework for future interagency coordination training and procedural refinement. Colonel Richardson's role within the validated record was clearly defined and officially acknowledged across all command levels, reinforcing the jurisdictional clarity that had emerged through the investigative process. The structured review concluded with a formal acknowledgement of procedural findings, confirming that all actions taken during the incident had been fully documented, verified, and aligned with established operational standards. By the completion of this phase, the highway incident had transitioned from an active field event into a finalized federal case file, permanently recorded within National Oversight Archives as a structured example of interagency coordination, verification protocol execution, and command-level accountability under unified operational review. As the final validation stage concluded, the entire federal and military review operation reached its formal closure phase, where the reconstructed timeline of events was locked into the National Case Archive, with full procedural confirmation. The highway, once a dynamic field environment of uncertainty and rapid escalation, now stood silent under controlled jurisdictional oversight, with all temporary command structures gradually deactivating as responsibilities transitioned back to standard operational channels. Colonel Ava Richardson's status had been fully verified, documented, and officially acknowledged across all command systems, confirming her authority and operational position beyond any remaining ambiguity. Her presence in the incident record was now defined solely through factual verification and procedural acknowledgement, ensuring that her role remained accurately preserved within the final archive documentation. Captain Marcus Hale oversaw the last synchronization of interagency reports, ensuring that every communication log, decision timestamp, and verified action sequence was permanently aligned within the master incident record before system closure. Officer Ryan Collins had completed all required testimony procedures, his statements formally incorporated into the finalized case documentation alongside cross-referenced digital and visual evidence, forming a consistent and validated account of the entire sequence of events. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained under formal administrative review status, with his case transferred into ongoing internal affairs proceedings for further evaluation under established disciplinary protocols, separate from the now closed field investigation. Senior oversight authorities completed the final compliance review, confirming that all procedural steps taken throughout the operation met required federal and military standards for interagency coordination, evidence handling, and command-level verification. With final confirmations completed, the case was officially entered into National Archival Records as a fully resolved interagency incident, designated for future reference in training, procedural development, and operational readiness evaluation. The structured documentation ensured that every element of the event, from initial contact through final resolution, was preserved in a verified and traceable format for institutional learning and accountability reinforcement. As command systems returned to normal operational status, the highway gradually resumed its standard function, with traffic flow restored and security perimeters dismantled in an orderly and controlled sequence. What remained was not the tension of the moment itself, but the permanent record of a fully documented case that would continue to inform future standards of coordination, verification, and authority across all participating agencies.